Hi everybody, and welcome to week 8. This signals midterm, so you've made it halfway through this course, which is really exciting. So I hope you've enjoyed the reading. I've tried to select a bunch of different types of creative nonfiction pieces. Some of you may have read David Sedaris, so here is another David Sedaris essay to read, which is going to be more humorous. But you can see for this week, midterm grades are going to be posted by 10:15. I'll likely have them in by Friday. You have one discussion post, which has to do with these creative nonfiction essay, or more of those invention strategies and exercises like you did last week. But this is from a website. And then read one essay and then begin writing. So it's a pretty simple week, and next week is fall break, so you're going to be writing through that too. But I had a small PowerPoint here. It's pretty short, that I wanted us to look at to talk about how to kind of start writing your draft. And a lot of you have such excellent ideas on your exercises that you did this past week with kind of the memory chains and all of that. Those were really great to read. Your blogs are also really great and interesting, and I love that. And I've tried to point out if I see something in there where I say that would make a great creative nonfiction piece. So some of you may have already kind of been starting this from this point. So when you start shaping your story, there are no real rules for creative nonfiction piece. So you can write some of it in poetry, you can mix genres, you can kind of break the bounds of what it means. You can experiment because it's your story. But really think of it as more than just like a journal entry. Think of it as kind of communicating the feeling that you have about the moment that you're sharing with your audience. You may want to write the story out full. So say you're telling a story of, a time your father kind of, when you were little and he didn't pick you up to go to the circus or something that you were really wanting to go to. You may write that story out fully, every possible thing you remember of it, and then go back through and say, okay, some of this is not interesting or important. Some of this is just kind of me filling in the memory. I'm going to kind of boil it down to its most interesting narrative parts, because remember, we want to engage our audience. It's about audience too. Also, see your eye as a character. So in that story, which actually did happen to me, he kind of left me as a small child sitting on the front step, really angry kind of at my mother instead of my father. The I in that, I see as me, but if I'm going to write it as a story, you kind of want to step back from it and see it almost as fiction in a way, and be able to see your I as a character. So that I, that little girl, what did she feel in that moment? And then what has the I now learned as a reflection, as a mother now, learned looking back at the reaction and the emotion of that kind of angry little girl on the step? And also you want to set the scene. So if I'm telling that story, I want you to see me in that moment in my little coat, all ready for the circus, the apartment that we lived in, the steps in front of the apartments. I want you to see the trees, the weather. I want to tell and set the scene as you would in a fiction story. Allow your reader into that moment visually too, and with all senses. So if there was a specific food or taste or smell that you remember, let the reader in a sensory way, as you would with fiction too. Another thing is to summarize backstory, but don't info dump. So if I'm telling you that story about sitting on that stoop waiting for my dad to take me to the circus, I'll give you some backstory, maybe about my parents' divorce, but I'm not going to info dump every single detail about my entire life up until that point, because only some details are important. And I don't know if you've ever read something where all of a sudden the action stops and there's just a big dump of information that you're like, how does this relate? But that's something to try to avoid, because it throws your reader out. It's unnecessary. So avoid it. And if you see it in someone else's story, you might note info dump here. Okay. And then remember too, I'm going to tell that story, but at the end of it, generally there's some kind of reflection. Now, I could stop with me just kind of yelling at my mom to go away, but then we might think as audience, okay, what are we supposed to take away from this? Where it would be nicer if I kind of stepped out for a minute to kind of reflect on that moment and kind of put a bow on it in a way. But remember, if you want to be more lyric, which is to kind of just go through the emotions of the piece in a more poetic way, which is probably what I as a poet would do. I might not just tie an easy bow. I might leave it. I might kind of reflect in a more poetic way than that. But trust your voice. Write about what you want to write about. I also wanted to put here some forms that you might choose to write your story in. So going back to that story that I was talking about, I might write my story, and we've seen various different kinds of these forms in the stories we've been reading. I've purposefully tried to choose really different essays so that you can get a feel for the different ways that people structure their pieces. But you might choose to go chronologically, so from the beginning to the end, or you might choose to go segmented. So I might show, a moment of me on the porch, and then segments of kind of other moments with my father to illustrate the sort of broken relationship that we have. I might also have a framed story where I start with me on the porch and I end with me on the porch, and I have something else kind of in the middle, whether it's kind of a lyric discussion or another moment. I might have a compare and contrast where I'm comparing and contrasting a moment with my father to a moment with my mother. I might also write it in epistolary form, which is in the form of a letter. So I might actually write it as a letter to my father, which is an interesting way to do it because it makes you kind of visualize an audience, especially for you. Visualizing an audience is hard. You might try the epistolary. A lyric essay, as I mentioned, is more about the emotional feel. You might do it more image-based. Some of you really appreciated walking for that. Some of you hated walking for that. But the more kind of image-based, kind of the logic, it does not have to make sense, the logic of a lyric essay. It's more about the feeling that I would have gotten sitting on that porch. Maybe I'm using a series of metaphors for my lyric essay. Another thing is multiple perspectives. So maybe I would use my perspective, then I would kind of interview my mother for her perspective, or my father, or my brother, or maybe even I would imagine what the cat saw with me sitting there, to kind of go in and out of these different perspectives. And another option is multi-genre, to kind of blend poetry, blend music, blend art even. Maybe you're really good at drawing and you want to kind of pop in, artistic or a lot of people for creative nonfiction use comics, which I think is excellent. So, feel free to experiment, be creative. Remember, this is creative writing. There aren't rules. The only rule I would suggest is avoid writing about breakups because that's easy. Find a moment that's really meaningful, that will touch other people. And let yourself be creative. Find your form. Find what you want to say. And happy drafting. Let me go back here real quick just to look at spring break, which is week 9. And you'll see, or not spring break, I don't know why I keep saying that, fall break. So the only thing you have to do this week, you have to do the suggestion board, post it and start that. But by the end of fall break, you should post your creative nonfiction. Now, if you get that done this week and post it, you have nothing to do over fall break. So keep that in mind, and we'll start the workshop after that. So, yeah, if you have any questions, as always, email me. And I hope you have fun with this. So I can't wait to read them. Bye.